In 1963, a farmer in central Turkey demolished a wall in his basement. The wall opened into a corridor, the corridor opened into another, and then another. 8 hours later, he was still descending, through rooms connected by tunnels, past ventilation shafts, past circular stone doors the size of grinding wheels. The shaft reached 85 meters below ground level, deeper than a 25-story building buried completely to its roof. And inside it, archaeologists eventually counted enough carved space for 20,000 people. Every stone door in the complex weighs approximately 500 kilograms. Every single one was designed to roll closed from the inside only. Whoever sealed Derinkuyu sealed it from within, then walked out through passages we have not yet fully mapped, and then disappeared. That is one city. There are dozens more like it, and 7 of them were sealed so completely that what is inside has never fully been seen again. Today I will show you 7 underground cities sealed by the people who built them. Each one is more deliberately closed than the last, deeper underground, further from any explanation, and more completely beyond reach. The first was sealed inside a cliff face and revealed by an earthquake. The last was sealed in Mexico 1,800 years ago. A robot entered it in 2013 and reached about 60 meters before the access ended. The burial chamber at the end of that tunnel, behind a door no one has touched in 18 centuries, has still not been reached. In that tunnel, liquid mercury poured deliberately on the floor, a ceiling of pyrite crystals arranged to resemble stars, and a stone plug placed from the inside by people who understood they were locking something away permanently. We'll reach it. But first, a cliff on the border between Georgia and Turkey, where a queen hid an entire city inside a mountain, and a single earthquake revealed everything. Vardzia, Georgia. A basalt cliff above the Kura River Gorge in the Samtskhe-Javakheti region of what is now southern Georgia. In 1185, Queen Tamar of the Georgian Empire gave the order to carve a city into the face of this cliff, not cut into a hillside, not built against the mountain's base, but placed inside the vertical wall of the canyon, invisible from the far bank of the river. The result was 13 tiers of carved rooms extending 50 meters back into the basalt, with an estimated 6,000 chambers total. Chapels, libraries, wine cellars, refectories, dormitories, stabling for livestock. A ceramic water pipe was laid inside the stone to carry water to the upper levels. From across the river, the face of the cliff appeared solid. The city was, by design, invisible. A medieval Georgian chronicle records that Tamar called the construction a place where the mountain itself became the wall. When Mongol advance forces arrived and found only a sheer cliff above the water, they turned back. The invisible city had survived its first test without a battle. Then, in 1283, a single geological event sealed it in a way that no army could. The earthquake of 1283 sheared several meters from the outer face of the cliff in one movement. The rooms that had been protected by a sealed stone exterior were suddenly open to daylight. The interior of the city, 6,000 rooms, 13 tiers, wine cellars a century old, was exposed. The population that had survived Mongol raids inside the sealed cliff could now be seen from across the river. The Persians sacked it in 1551. By the 17th century, fewer than a dozen monks lived in a handful of the highest rooms. Most of Vardzia today is inaccessible. The lower tiers have collapsed inward. Rooms that were occupied in 1185 are sealed behind collapsed ceilings, and what is inside them has not been reached. The city that survived the Mongols did not survive the rock it was hidden in. They sealed it from inside the cliff face. That has not changed. If you subscribe, you will not miss what comes next. Each city on this list was sealed with more intention than the last. The entry with the most deliberately sealed chambers is still ahead. Under the village of Naours in northern France, 13 meters below a field of wheat in the Picardy department, an hour south of the Somme, there are 28 galleries, 6 public squares, more than 300 rooms, a bakehouse, a chapel, and stabling carved from soft chalk. The network was cut beginning in the 2nd century and expanded over roughly 1,800 years. At its peak capacity, it held approximately 3,000 people for weeks at a time. Naours has never had more than a few hundred surface inhabitants. The village could not have built this alone. The system was used by the people of an entire region, walking to it when armies came through. On a morning in October 1916, an Australian soldier billeted in Naours for rest pulled a chair to a corner of a barn. The floor gave way. He slid into a passage that had not seen daylight since roughly the 1630s, when the last warband of the 30 Years' War swept through, and the villagers sealed the entrance, came back to the surface, and then, within a generation, forgot where the door was. When other soldiers came down with torches, they found the rooms intact. Hearths, carved niches, the names of the families who had lived there in the medieval period. And then they found something else. Approximately 3,000 individual pieces of graffiti. Names, regimental numbers, drawn faces, rifles, flowers, dates. From 1916 and 1917. The diggers had found a medieval city and used it for the same purpose it was built for. They stayed alive inside it while a war moved above them. The chalk galleries run for several kilometers in total. Ventilation shafts were cut to the surface at intervals. Separate sections were designated for livestock, grain storage, water. The system was not an extension of a cellar. It was planned, over centuries, by people who understood that the land they lived on had been a corridor for armies for as long as anyone could remember. The last documented use before the 17th century was during the 100 Years' War, more than 2 centuries before that final sealing. Whoever sealed it in the 1630s walked out, closed the entrance from the inside, and probably intended to return. They did not. They sealed it from the inside. That decision has not been reversed. In Iran, the city beneath the modern town of Nushabad was found in almost exactly the same way. Except the man who found it in 2007 was digging a hole to store vegetables. Nushabad sits in Isfahan province, not far from the city of Kashan. In the summer of 2007, a resident was cutting a storage pit in his courtyard at roughly 4 meters depth when his shovel broke through a ceiling. He climbed down with a flashlight and found a carved gallery that had no right to be under his yard. The underground network beneath Nushabad, called Uyi by the historians who eventually studied it, extends approximately 4 kilometers through 3 descending levels, reaching 18 meters at its deepest point. The complex is approximately 1,500 years old, constructed during the Sasanian Empire, the last major Persian dynasty before the Arab conquest of the 7th century. It had been sealed and apparently forgotten sometime in the medieval period. Engineers from the University of Isfahan spent months mapping the defense architecture of Uyi. What they found was a system designed for one person to hold a corridor against many. Each guard alcove is carved not at eye level but at floor level, a shallow niche cut into the base of the wall, barely visible unless you already know where it is. A guard inside could see the knees and ankles of every person approaching from either direction. The person walking upright in the corridor would see only a flat wall. One individual with a short blade could hold an entire passageway without revealing any part of their body. The ventilation channels are angled so that smoke from torches rises and exits without marking the location of the surface openings above. Water cisterns are kept separate from the living areas. Uyi worked. People used it. The chambers show evidence of extended occupation across multiple generations. But at some point in the medieval period, the last occupants walked out, drained the water storage, and sealed the entrances. No inscription explains why. No Persian, Arab, or Islamic chronicle from the region mentions the construction of this city. They sealed it from the inside. The last person out never left a note, and no record from outside records that anyone went in. Both Naours and Nushabad were functional shelters built by people running from specific threats. The next underground complex on this list served a purpose no one has identified. The people who built it then erased every record of having done so. In 1992, a farmer in Zhejiang province, China, spent several weeks pumping a local pond that had been called bottomless within living memory. The water in it stayed cold even in summer. No one had reached the bottom by hand. When the pumps finally cleared the surface, the farmer did not find silt or submerged tree roots. He found stone steps descending into darkness beneath his village. What archaeologists eventually found in the drained ponds of Xi'an Beikun were 24 separate man-made caves beneath the waterline. Each one covers approximately 2,000 square meters, roughly the footprint of a regulation football pitch, with carved vaults rising 30 meters from floor to ceiling. The total volume of rock removed to create the Longyou Cave complex exceeds 1 million cubic meters. That is equivalent to removing, by hand, enough solid stone to fill 400 Olympic swimming pools. An engineer who surveyed the interior walls in the early stages of excavation ran a laser instrument across a 2-meter panel of carved surface. The walls of the Longyou Caves are covered with parallel grooves, identical in width, identical in depth, identical in angle. The measured deviation between any two grooves across that 2-meter panel was less than 2 millimeters. He said afterward that he could not account for how this was achieved. A precision milling machine produces that kind of consistency. A bronze chisel in human hands does not across a surface of this scale. Chinese historians have documented virtually every construction project in Chinese history, from the earliest Shang irrigation works through the Han Canal networks and Tang Road construction. The Longyou Caves appear in none of them, not in any provincial record, not in any administrative registry, not in any local legend, not in any inscription on the cave walls themselves. There are no names inside, no dates, no painted markers, no religious imagery. The civilization that removed 1 million cubic meters of stone from beneath a series of ponds left no trace of itself above the waterline. One research camp holds that the caves were a quarry and the records were lost. The other notes that quarries of any comparable scale in Chinese history are always documented in exactly the kind of provincial records that exist for this region, and that the finish quality of these walls is inconsistent with any quarry technique. A quarry removes material. The Longyou Caves removed material and then polished what was left with a precision that suggests the interior was the point. They sealed it, and then erased every record of its existence. That has not changed. Now Derinkuyu, Central Turkey. The name means deep well. It extends 85 meters below the surface of Cappadocia, through 18 carved floors. The volcanic tuff of this region is soft enough to carve easily and stable enough to hold for centuries. The complex was large enough to shelter an estimated 20,000 people at once, with livestock pens, grain stores, wine cellars, water wells, ventilation shafts, a school, and a Christian chapel cut into the deepest accessible levels. The earliest sections are believed to date to between the 8th and 7th centuries before the Common Era, though the complex was expanded for roughly 2,000 years after that, by Phrygians, then early Christian communities, then Byzantine populations under pressure from Arab raids. The farmer who broke through the wall in his basement in 1963 reported he had been meaning to expand his storage area. The first archaeological team that descended spent 8 hours and did not reach the bottom. The stairwells between levels narrow to the width of one person. Wide enough to pass, too narrow for a group to fight in formation. At intervals of roughly 30 meters, the tunnels were fitted with circular millstone doors. Each weighs approximately 500 kilograms. Each is shaped to roll on a track, and the tracks run only on the interior side. A person inside could seal the level from within, alone, in a few seconds. A group of people outside the stone could not move it. They would have to wait. Here is what most visitors to Derinkuyu do not learn while they are standing inside it. In the 1970s, archaeologists found a connecting tunnel. It runs for 9 kilometers underground before surfacing near the neighboring city of Kaymakli. Kaymakli has 8 underground floors. Only 4 are currently excavated and accessible. The 9-kilometer passage between them has been partially cleared, but has not been fully walked end to end. Regional surveys suggest Derinkuyu and Kaymakli are not 2 connected cities but 2 known entry points of a network estimated to include around 100 underground settlements across Cappadocia. Most have not been entered. Most remain sealed. The Phrygians who began this network had no documented enemies at the time of construction. The first recorded use of the complex as a refuge comes centuries after the earliest carved levels, which means someone built an 18-floor, 85-meter underground city with sealed millstone doors before they had a demonstrable reason to hide in one. That gap has never been resolved. They sealed it from the inside, 9 kilometers of connected chambers in all. That has not changed. Vardzia was sealed from outside the cliff by an earthquake. Naours was sealed and forgotten. Nushabad was sealed and unknown. Longyou was sealed and all memory of it erased. Derinkuyu was sealed with 500-kilogram stones that only close from within. The next city was sealed not by human hands but by a geological event, and what was locked inside when the rock fell has not been fully reached. Vardzia is the city I have already described, carved into the cliff face, revealed by the earthquake of 1283, partially accessible today. What I have not told you is what was inside the rooms that collapsed inward when the cliff face sheared off. The lower tiers of Vardzia, sealed by collapsed ceilings since 1283, are being excavated slowly. Each year, a small number of rooms are reopened for the first time since the medieval period. Fresco fragments are being recovered from chambers sealed for more than 750 years. The wine cellars on the lower levels have not been fully entered. The library, which a Georgian chronicle says contained manuscripts unique to this complex, has not been found. It is either in a room already opened and emptied long ago, or in one of the rooms still sealed behind collapsed stone. The earthquake sealed it. The decision to re-enter has not been made quickly. The island of Malta, village of Paola, 1902. Construction workers digging a cistern broke through a floor and fell into a space that had not been opened for approximately 3,500 years. Access to what they found, the Ħal Saflieni Hypogeum, has been restricted since 1990 to a maximum of 80 visitors per day, with a waiting list that currently runs to several weeks. The Hypogeum is a 3-level complex carved from limestone beginning around 6,000 years ago, at approximately 4000 BCE, when the pyramid builders of Egypt's Old Kingdom were beginning their first major constructions. This structure had already been sealed and in use for 2,000 years. Inside it, archaeologists recovered the skeletal remains of approximately 7,000 people. The workers who broke through in 1902 described the air inside as cold and completely still. The bones were not piled, they were organized. The 7,000 individuals had been placed over centuries. Archaeologist Themistocles Zamet, who led the first formal excavation, wrote in his notes that the arrangement of the remains was deliberate in a way that implied continuous ritual use rather than mass burial. One room in the complex, the Oracle Chamber, has a property that was not studied scientifically until 2008. If a male voice with a naturally low register produces sound directly into a carved niche in the wall, the acoustic resonance produced travels at approximately 110 Hz through the entire 3-level structure. Every wall vibrates. In 2008, a research team from the Royal Institute of British Architects and the University of Salford measured this effect on volunteers positioned throughout the complex. At 110 Hz, that sustained resonance produces measurable suppression of left hemisphere brain activity. It temporarily alters the balance between analytical and spatial processing in the human brain. The builders of the Hypogeum cut this room to those dimensions, in that limestone, at that depth, 6,000 years ago. Researchers who hold that the acoustic properties are coincidence note that small carved rooms often have unusual resonance. Researchers who hold the opposite note that no other carved space from this period produces this specific frequency with this specific neurological effect, and that the geometry of the Oracle Chamber is too precise to be an accident. They sealed it. The 80 people allowed inside each day have not yet produced an agreed explanation. And now Mexico, Teotihuacan, 50 kilometers northeast of Mexico City, one of the largest cities in the pre-Columbian Western Hemisphere, with a population that may have reached 125,000 at its height during the 3rd and 4th centuries of the Common Era. The city was abandoned around 550 CE. The reason for that abandonment is not known. In 2003, archaeologist Sergio Gomez of Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History noticed a sinkhole forming near the base of the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. He ordered a ground-penetrating radar survey of the surrounding area. The survey returned an anomaly, a tunnel 14 meters below the surface, running 103 meters toward the center of the temple complex. The entrance had been sealed with a stone plug. The plug had been placed from the inside. Gomez spent 10 years preparing to enter the tunnel. The ceiling was geologically unstable. The floor was covered in fine material that would be disturbed by human presence. In 2013, a remote-controlled robot with lights and cameras was lowered through a cleared access point. It moved forward and transmitted what it encountered: thousands of metallic spheres coated in yellow mineral, a form of oxidized pyrite called jarosite. The spheres covered the floor and were fixed to the ceiling to create the effect of a night sky inside the tunnel. Stars above and below. Between them, on the floor, liquid mercury. The robot moved to approximately 60 meters and reached the entrance to 3 side chambers. Inside those chambers, rubber balls, jade statuettes, jaguar bones, carved shells, wooden objects more than 1,800 years old. The robot could not enter the main chamber at the far end of the tunnel. The passage was blocked by debris from above. The chamber behind it has not been reached. One camp in the archaeological community holds that Teotihuacan's tunnel is the burial of the city's founders, and that when excavators reach the chamber at the end, they will find the oldest royal burial in Mesoamerican history. The other camp argues that the mercury rivers on the floor are a symbolic map of the underworld as the builders conceived of it, and that the pyrite stars represent the sky at the moment of the city's founding. Both camps agree on the same thing. The stone plug at the entrance was placed from within, by people who knew they were sealing something permanently. The mercury alone represents several tons of liquid metal, carried underground in ceramic vessels and poured deliberately onto a tunnel floor that was then sealed and buried under a temple platform. The chamber at the end has not been reached. They sealed it from the inside, 18 centuries ago. That stone has not moved. 7 cities under the ground. A cliff city in Georgia, sealed by the earthquake that exposed it. A medieval refuge in northern France, sealed and forgotten within a generation, rediscovered by a soldier who fell through the floor. A Sasanian defense network in Iran, found by a man digging a storage pit, sealed and unknown for over 1,000 years. 24 caves in China, with walls of machine-like precision, and no historical record of any kind. The connected underground network of Cappadocia, mostly unexcavated, sealed with half-ton millstone doors that close only from inside. A Maltese hypogeum 6,000 years old, its 7,000 dead organized with deliberate care, its oracle chamber producing a frequency that measurably alters brain function. And a tunnel in Mexico where the room at the end has been waiting, sealed, since the 2nd century. What connects these is not their scale or their age, it is the choice. Every one of these cities was sealed by the people who knew it best. They built it, used it, and then closed the door behind them when they left. Some were running from a known enemy. Some were protecting something they considered worth hiding permanently. And some, Longyou, Teotihuacan, did not leave enough traces for us to determine what they were doing at all. History generally assumes that knowledge moves forward, that what is known now exceeds what was known before. The builders of the Longyou Caves cut stone with a consistency that a modern engineer standing inside them in 1992 could not immediately account for. The architects of the Hypogeum understood an acoustic and neurological effect that researchers did not measure scientifically until 2008. The people who sealed the tunnel at Teotihuacan understood something about permanence. That seal has held for 18 centuries and is still holding. These cities were sealed from the inside. Most of what lies inside them is still there, not lost, not destroyed, waiting, in the dark, in the silence of sealed stone, exactly where it was placed. But there is a different kind of sealing. These 7 cities were sealed by the people who built them, for reasons we can sometimes guess. There are places on the surface of the earth, coordinates that exist, locations that appear on internal government records, that do not appear on any satellite map available to the public, not because of technical limitations, because a specific decision was made to remove them. 7 such locations have had their names changed, their borders redrawn, and their satellite imagery systematically replaced with blank white space or cloned terrain from neighboring regions. The roads on the official maps do not go to them. The fences around them are not on any publicly available survey. What is inside those locations has never been formally acknowledged by the governments that erased them. That is where we are going next.